All
Hey,
right.
Job Seeker Nation, what's up? Welcome to the show. This is Job Seeker Nation. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We stream there. We also have a nice little account there on YouTube, so you can find us under Job Seeker Nation with the hashtag. Welcome, and we've got a lot to talk about just between Jack and I. We don't even have guests, so we're going to keep your pipes filled for this particular hour. So if you have any questions, you still need some job advice, feel free to ask us in the chat. Say hi to us, say what's up, tell us where you're from. Also, you could also start putting your questions. We will get to it as we begin to talk about some of these topics. Now, you'll also notice that although we have a theme about finding a job in the slow recovery industry, we're talking about things that are not necessarily directly related, but we will answer those questions when you have, and should you have one, because there's a lot of news going on. We decided to cover some of that as well as making it a topical discussion to retool you and help give you the tools. Across from me, of course, is Jack Kelly, recruiter.io. He's an author, compliance recruiter, and also senior Forbes contributor for careers. You'll find many of the articles floating around recently if you've been watching LinkedIn and Twitter. You'll see a lot of his articles being the topic of discussion. And so we're going to start it off. Of course, you know me, and you can find me, of course, at the Voice of Job Seekers. Hey, let's do a fire starter, Jack. Even though I usually start with
Firestarter.
topic one, but was talking
Yeah.
about fire starter because apparently this article was a fire starter in a good way, that got people talking on NPR. If you hit up my tweet and find Jack's timeline, you'll see this article from Forbes: Workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers. But you'll also find an NPR interview somewhere along that timeline as well. As Jack, you've been talking a lot about, and we've been talking about even before this week, about how people are starting to say, hey, let me bet on myself as I go about and quit this job that mistreats me or doesn't pay me well. Your initial thoughts in writing the article?
So I have mixed thoughts on it. Where on one side, excuse me, on one side is this: you have a lot of people who are in jobs that they hate,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly there's a lot of people in, let's say, the blue collar or deskless, worker class. In that
Mm-hmm.
you're working at a warehouse, you're working at a fast food restaurant, and these are
Mm-hmm.
kind of rough jobs. There's not sometimes not a lot of advancement, and there comes a time when you say, "What am I doing? There got to be something better." Life is
Mm-hmm.
short. I have to do something better. And they're like, "Hey, I'm going to quit and find something else." So, but if you're in a role, let's say you're a waiter or waitress in Nashville, Tennessee, and you have this row of bars and clubs and restaurants, if you're not treated well, you could say, "You know what? I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I'm going to go somewhere else. Maybe they'll treat me better." But
Mm-hmm.
my concern comes in, Mark, is when, let's say, it's more a white collar kind of job, which the timeline to get a new job takes longer. It's not it's not so easy to get another job. So you may say, my boss is a jerk. I hate him. He's a micromanager. He's terrible. He's all this kind of stuff. But then if you just quit, like rage quit, like I'm out of here,
Mm-hmm.
and say some things you later, so nasty things to the person, you're gonna feel good for a moment. Then a week or two later, you're gonna be like, what did I do?
Mm-hmm.
What am I like? All right, what am I going to do now? And then if you go on an interview, you lose your negotiating power because you don't have a job, so you can't leverage that. You can't say, "Hey, if you don't give me more money, I'll get a counteroffer." Then you got to worry when you interview, how do you spin it without sounding like a jerk that you just left and told off your boss? So on one hand, I get this whole, great resignation, people quitting their jobs, but I'm definitely a little nervous that if people could do it because they feel, hey, yeah, this is the thing to do, but then they realize after the fact, wow, that wasn't a really good decision for me and put me in a bad spot. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
That makes sense, but there's the other side too, and we talked a little bit last week. People had time to think about And you mentioned it in your interview at NPR that people had time to think about it and really give it some thought and have strategically quit their jobs because they didn't want to wait. And some people have saved up enough to even consider it. Others had other benefits are going on. Others just saying, hey, I'm just going to take the risk. I've been retooling and reskilling and I've been upskilling. Let me go ahead and take this risk because this job is way too much on my mind, my heart, and my soul. So there's that other half of it as well. But you're right. I'm concerned that people get caught up in the spirit and the trends of things because it sounds great. And as soon as you hear it, that everybody's, take this job and shove it kind of attitude, but not everybody's prepared. So that's
Yeah.
why my summation has been that yeah, there's this big shift, but I don't think, and I think you kind of state that you've stated as well. It's a little bit too early to say how great the resignation actually is, because if it's really the resignation part is great, but it'll be even greater if you resigned and went into another job right from there, and that's really the way to go. Because you're right, unfortunately, employment bias continues to be prevalent and is very real. And it's better to look for a job while you have a job.
I like what you're saying in that, just to expand upon it. So yeah, the ones who are strategic about it, that's the way to go. It's like
Yeah.
playing the long game. So
Yeah.
that what I advise people to do, and this is gonna sound so like psychopathic. This is gonna sound like
Hmm.
this could sound really cold and crass. So what you want to do is this: you don't. All right. Instead of saying everything you want to say to your boss because you want to get it off your chest, don't. Right? Don't do that.
Right.
Keep
Don't
on
do
the
that.
inside. But what you
Absolutely.
do is you play the game. And what I mean by playing the game is this: is that, you know what? Let's say you come into the office, you come in early, you stay late. When the boss says something, you're like, "Oh, that was genius, boss. That was great. You're so smart." But you don't say it in a
Hmm.
sarcastic way. You want to say it like you really mean it. If there's a project to do, you raise your hand, say, "I'll do it. I'll take care of it." And
Hmm.
the reason I'm saying this stuff is because then it lulls your manager into this comfort zone, like, "Oh, okay. Hey, Jack is really stepping up. He's doing a great job. Huh."
Hmm.
So then he has no idea that you're looking for another job. So while
Hmm.
on one hand, you're playing the game, you're saying all the right things, you're doing all the right things. You don't even tell your coworkers what you're up to. You just want to, like, everything is cool. I love everything. But while you're
Hmm.
doing it, you're networking, you're kind of working on your LinkedIn, you're fixing up your resume, you're
Hmm.
just doing some homework, getting some market intelligence, sending out resumes, meeting with recruiters, having career coaches help you out, maybe get a resume writer to write your resume. So this way you have it planned. Like you said,
Hmm.
like strategically, I think you said it, like strategically, you have a
Hmm.
plan. So then when finally you do get a new job, then you know what? Then you could just say, "Hey, thanks for everything, boss. You were great. You were lovely. You were awesome. I just fell in my lap. I'm moving on." So there's no drama. There's no
Right.
awkward in between stage. You probably get a better offer because you have a job, so you're more confident when you're interviewing. So I think for people who get caught up with this is what kind of bothers me a little with the Great Resignation. It almost pushes people, yeah, do it, jump into the deep end of the pool. It's like when you were younger and your friends kind of
Yeah.
goad you to do something dumb. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
like it almost has that feeling like people are being
Yes.
goaded to say, yeah, do it, quit your job. And that's, to me, like, not really I think that's dangerous advice. Now, could it end up working out well for somebody who does it? Sure. But you got to
Hmm.
play the odds. The odds are you could put it in a bad spot and it take a long time to find a job. And then you're just kicking yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of layers to it, and you know, one of the things I consider is for people to consider their move is, are they moving into something to where if there's not a lot of movement in your industry where your job, are you sure you're moving and changing to a career that where there is a lot of movement and there are a lot of jobs? And that's probably one of the first things to ask
Yeah.
yourself is what will it look like 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Having said that, though, I think what we think of the old idea of career trajectory, it's almost impossible to imagine what it's going to be 10 years from now because of the because technology changes in the instant. So we know that technology changes the access, it changes the way that information is divvied out, but it also changes the way that people train for those jobs of the future. So in some sense, yet in some industries like the technology industry, there's a wave. And for a lot of people, if you're following that wave, that may not be good enough for the paying job that you want. You want to be on that wave. So you want to be there when it's happening. So you've got to kind of construct your job search and your future in such a way that you're going to be on the wave. And one of the ways you'll be able to do that, if you're going to join these organizations that people are a part of, where they are giving out and exploring what's going to be new and what's going to be next. So if you're on that and you're listening to, even if you're just listening to that conversation, you're going, well, so and so start to have those particular skills. This is the way that they think. I should probably think this way. And you don't have to think exactly that way, but what you're doing is you're starting to follow, okay, somebody who's on the edge. It may be a stark difference between somebody who really works in that industry and people who or you work with, because if they're not connected, you're going to be automatically in the mix when it comes time to make those changes, because likely they're talking about what they're planning to do with their careers in those industry organizations. Especially if you're participating in them and that you're on those committees, ultimately, no matter how you do it, being part of those organizations are, I think, are critical these days. And I think just about every industry has some kind of industry organization to be a part of, that even in the slow recovering market, where there might be lots of jobs or there may not be as many jobs and they're hiring very slow, you've got to learn to not just look after one interview. You've got to get several interviews, and that could be a little bit of chance to do if you've never done it before. But that's all I'll say, that you've got to be on top of your game and be on top of the trends that are happening, so that you can be an applicant as they happen, not so much an applicant as an afterthought.
No, you're right. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but a couple of things that you mentioned. Yeah. It's so hard to predict the future, what's going to happen, like you said, 5, 10, 20 years. But you
Hmm.
can keep your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, so that
Yes.
if you start noticing it, you could pivot yourself if you so choose. If you find where, hey, I'm seeing a trend where the sector I'm in is really not doing well and it's going poorly. Let's just say you're in the oil and gas industry, right? And you see,
Hmm.
electric vehicles are doing really, really well. You might say, all right, let's presume you're a relatively young person. You're like, okay, so what am I better off? Am I better off staying with an industry that's maybe going to be declining? And I don't know if it is or not, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's declining. Or should I see to take my skills and maybe start looking into the electric vehicle thing, because that's where it's going to go. So,
Right.
you really want to stay ahead, because you don't want to end up when it's too late. And then you're too,
Right.
I don't want to say you're too old, but sometimes it's hard. Trust me, I'm an older guy. It's harder to do.
Yeah.
It's harder to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
So you got to be realistic about it. So you got to make sure. So that's kind of one thing. But then it's the other thing too, is that you got to keep in mind when you talk about this Great Resignation. What I'm finding out, there's a huge disconnect what people talk about and what the reality is. So, like,
Hmm.
you would think, because the market is better, the stock market is better, job market is better, real estate market is better, companies are doing well, there's more hiring, but yet there's like a roadblock, because I think a lot of these companies haven't made a switch. Let me give you an example. Like, I hear
Hmm.
from candidates all the time with all these stories. So, like, they'll interview, they'll go to interview and they'll ask, hey, is it remote? Is it hybrid? What is it? And you'll get like squishy answers like, well, we don't know yet. So it's like, all right, how can I now go to this place if you're not going to let me know am I going to be in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week? What's the deal? Well, we're
Hmm.
working on it. So right then and there, it's like, all right, for some people who maybe are open to going to office, but not 5 days a week, why you're not going to pursue it. I
Mm-hmm.
notice that a lot of companies haven't changed the compensation from like the pandemic time. So in other words, they're still offering money as if we're, 6, 9 months ago, a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of job seekers are saying, wait, no, you know what? Why it shifted. Yes, 6, 9 months ago, it was horrible. Now it's pretty good and growing. So shouldn't I get more of a premium if I move now? And as you pointed out too, like, okay, they're talking about another Delta variants or what have you. So there still is fear out there. There's still uncertainty.
Sure.
I'm an optimist, so I kind of feel we're out of the woods, but I'm not naive. I mean, I don't. There's still things we
Mm-hmm.
got to worry about. So that
Yeah.
candidates, if they're looking, they're worried about these things, so that they may not get as much money as you want. And the reason I'm bringing it up, so people who are thinking of just making a rash decision really kind of consider it, because it's not so easy as the media would make it out to be. Like, oh yeah, just quit, resign, get a new job. Not so easy. And then also because when you get into the summertime, historically summertime is usually really super slow, because Mark is the HR guy, you're out on vacation, then you come back,
Mm-hmm.
I'm the candidate, I go on vacation, then I come back, and then the people you have to meet with are away, so it's hard to get traction. And then what we're seeing now is so many more people going away for the obvious reasons. They want to see their family they haven't seen, they want to see maybe their parents they haven't seen, siblings, so that it's not going to be so easy. So I think people have to really have, and I know you don't want to hear this because you want to hear, yeah, just get out there, quit, get a new job.
Right.
People like that nice, easy thing, but there's just a lot to really think about before you make that decision.
Well, the thing I think about is a whole lot more elementary than what you're saying, and I think it from the very basic point. People who have terrible resumes and interview badly will continue to
Yeah.
interview badly, and people will have terrible resumes and won't get a look. That's what I think, is a big part of the reality, is that people, if you're not prepared to interview and you did it in the spirit of what everybody else is, and or you had close friends are doing it, you're the one not prepared. You'll also be the one not having a job. Then that idea that the Great Resignation was going to be this wave that you can ride to a next job, when really it still comes down to your preparation, you understanding what the employer wants, you meaning what the employer's pain point is, you understanding what it's going to take to continue to do great in that job. You've still got to do all of those things. And you know God bless people who are daring and they're bold and they're willing to take a risk themselves. But you didn't take the right risk when you're not prepared. You haven't interviewed in 2 or 3 years, because that's changed. People are doing more video interviews. They're not even talking to a person the first 3 or 4 interviews. And then the interviews are longer. The interviews are 10, 11 deep. They're not 2 or 3 people, even though I honestly think, what could possibly take more than 4
Oh my
interviews
God.
or even 3 interviews, much less 10 interviews? So people who are not prepared for what's going on, unless you've been in it before everybody start quitting, then you might be a lost sheep who
Yeah.
doesn't know what's going on. And really, you're back at the same square you were before you got this past job, that you had to shore up your skills and present yourself in such a way that will impress an employer.
It gets so interesting to talk about interviews. So another thing that I was writing about, I think it's last week, I'm losing track of time, was this
Mm-hmm.
guy, Mike Conley, who is a software developer, and he was looking
Mm-hmm.
for a software developer leadership role. And
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to do like 11 interviews. And he basically said, you know what, enough is enough. I'm
Mm-hmm.
pulling out. And it went viral, at least LinkedIn viral.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Right.
LinkedIn is
Right.
not meant to be just like crazy like other sites.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more, sober. So he had about 2 million views at this point of his
Mm-hmm.
post, walking through why he decided not to go. And then the crazy thing, Mark, is that you had to see there were just like thousands of people just saying the same thing, like, hey, here's what they did to me. I went, they made me go through like 7 interviews and then I was ghosted. Or, I went on 6 interviews, then they made me do this project, and then they gave me a psychometric test, and then I was still ghosted. And like, you
Mhm.
name any variation. And it was wild to see, because usually, what happens, someone posts something and maybe 5 people say one thing, and then you get the other people say, no, you're wrong, that's dumb.
Right.
It was
Mhm.
just all, so many people being opening up, and you could tell it was cathartic. You could tell that people thought it was just them, that they were going through this tough patch in terms of interviewing, that they were being treated
Mhm.
brutally. They didn't get feedback, they didn't get constructive criticism, they were ignored. They thought it was them. But then now when they see everybody, it was almost like this therapy session where
Right.
people felt like, oh, all right, it's not just me. Because then you start feeling bad about yourself. Like, what am I doing wrong? But it's
Yeah.
it's a thing now.
And thus the caveat, well, the ride into the first topic, really is really the same thing. I just decided to
Yeah.
divide it up about how exaggerated the Great Resignation is, why, and you hit on a great reason why it's often exaggerated. Now, I went back for an article that I wrote on thevoiceofjobseekers.com. May of 2019, there were 4.4 million jobs that became open. I'm sorry, there were 4.4 that left their jobs. There was not. It was like 7 million jobs that were open, and I was just trying to think. Every time that there's more jobs opening, employers just seem to add different layers to the interview process, and just the timing and all that to
Yeah.
say that to get people to slow their roll. But really, a lot of it comes down to not even what the employer does to get people to jump through different hoops. It's the fact that the people are not prepared for it, and they're not prepared for what it looks like. And to some degree, it's good to ask those questions up front. Okay, as you begin to, um, you begin to network and try to find out information about the company, is that you don't want to stop at the referral person. Once you get a referral, that shouldn't be it. You've got to dig a lot deeper now to actually find
Yeah.
out what people are actually thinking in the company, and somehow weave that into your responses as you begin to talking to the camera when you do the video interview,
Yeah.
where there's nobody on the other side but a bot. Hello, higher view. And then you get the other half where you are talking to somebody who's just taking a survey, and they count that even as part of the interview, which is the craziest thing I ever heard of. But that's what some people are
Yeah.
doing, and they don't tell you there's a survey, but they send
Wait,
their
what do you mean by a
you
survey, Mark? I'm not sure, but
well, they're just asking questions like, "What do you think about this? How do you feel about, let's say, remote work 3 times a week and coming into the
oh, so
office
it's
twice a
not like
day?"
they care
So,
really about your end. They just want
so
their own. They're
they're
gathering
just
data.
feeling you out, and
Oh,
included in
I
that,
never
of
thought of
course,
that, huh?
is the magic salary question. It said, "Okay, how
Yeah.
much are you expecting to get out of it?"
Right.
That person won't say anything. They won't say no, but they'll continue to take that
Hmm.
information. I can't say that's universal anywhere, but I'm just saying, though, the fact that if you're not prepared for the marathon, you're just prepared to run the sprint, you will fall short. And there's a lot of people, I think, the reason why I think, like you, from this vantage point, is that people aren't going to have this long time to apply
Yeah.
for jobs. By September, something's going to say, "Oh, well, they're not choosing just anybody to come through. They're
Yeah.
really still being very judicious about the type of talent that they want to work for them."
Yeah, yeah. It's. I like what you were saying. That I would suggest for people. It's easy for me to say and you to say, but it's hard to do. But when you go on the interview, to try to find out right up front, let's say you're the interviewer, Mark, to say,
Hmm.
hey, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me in. If you don't mind, what should I expect, so I can manage my expectations? Will this be a 1 month search? Will it be 3 months? Would I meet with 5 people? Can you tell me a little bit about, Mark? Now, I'm making it sound easy, but when you're in that seat, I know it's hard to do. But I think
Mm-hmm.
given what we're seeing in the market, that there's a tendency to over interview for long periods of time, it probably makes sense to try to find that out right out of the gate. So this way
Right.
you have an idea because you may opt out if you hear, well, because sometimes people just be, sometimes they're shady and they don't give you the right, the exact answer. Other times people are
Mm-hmm.
just transparent. They'll say, hey, Mark, it'll probably be 3 to 6 months because we want to hire, but it's not an immediate, and they'll give a reason why. And then you have to make a decision. Say, well, if it's going to take 6 months, and I'm going to meet with 5 people. Yeah, you know what? Maybe I'll take a pass. Or you
Yeah.
might say, I love this job so much. It's awesome. You know what? I'll deal with it, but at least I know. Now I could pace myself. I know because if you don't know, that's when people get really upset and they feel
Mm-hmm.
bad and their self-esteem is hurt because they're like, why does this keep going on? What's the matter? I don't get it. And when you don't get any context, it's easy to blame
Mm-hmm.
yourself and think, what did I do wrong? What did I say wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think that, considering that, and we're going to dive into one of the articles you wrote. I think it's very timely, but we did talk about a little bit last week how people are being offered signing bonuses.
Mhm.
Those who make the $16 to $25 an hour, even, which is very unusual. But at the same time, uh, people aren't just going to fork over
Yeah.
$1,000. They're going to put a caveat: you got to be 6 months to a year to get some
Yeah.
of that money, and you're going to only get a certain amount at a certain time. Don't be surprised if that happens. If
Yeah.
this would fit you. But I think overall, in those positions now, there might be a meeting of energy that they really need someone versus I really need a job because I quit my other one
Yeah.
and this whole thing didn't work out. Now, I went to Chili's yesterday.
Mhm.
Was it yesterday? No, it was Monday. Monday, I went to Chili's. They had one server for the whole restaurant. They had one server. So for the only way for us to eat, like right away when we wanted to eat, was go to the bar to eat. Now that's not a bad thing. And I'm not trying to give restaurant strategy around here, but I want to make the point that the whole thing about the restaurant industry being short workers is very real. There are people who are in those subsectors where you have to have some kind of training and experience to be successful in it, and that fits the people who are making around the 16 to 20, $25 an hour. Uh, th- those jobs are going to probably maybe even open up and close very quickly because the people who really need a job, they're going to go get one of those
Yeah.
jobs. And whether they are returning there or maybe they're taking a downgrade till they can figure out what their next move is.
Yeah.
But all that to say is that the first flood of people, like I said, they're going to get exposed, and they're being exposed. They're giving terrible answers to interview questions. They're also giving out somewhat false information on their resume that a good hiring manager can see from a mile away. There's a lot of those things still going on. So those people who
Mhm.
aren't prepared, who didn't think it through, who didn't take our advice, who are going to get hit like they and be surprised and be very disappointed in what's going on.
It's so interesting on so many levels. Um, give you one example. So let's just turn back the clock like 6 months ago. We would
Mm-hmm.
go out, we'd go out to eat, my family,
Mm-hmm.
because the kids were, they closed down the schools, so they're both, from college, so they came back,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say we went, we go a bunch of times, and each experience was just mediocre at best.
Yeah.
And the food not so great, the prices went up, the service not so great. But at the time, it didn't occur to me from what you're saying now. Because at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, what? Because like still, like in a pandemic, things are just you're not sure what's happening. Now in hindsight, I realize because they didn't have the staff, they probably didn't have the people, in the kitchen and so on and so forth because of COVID and what was happening. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so everything wasn't that great and it was bad. And you got to wonder too, is that bad moving forward for a lot of these restaurants and bars and places because you're like, I don't know, like, would you go back to that Chili's now? Because are you going to have that, no pun intended, that bad taste in your mouth saying, that wasn't a pleasant experience, I'm going to
Right.
go. But here's the other thing which I'm really worried about. This is something that I think is definitely something of concern. There has to come a point where right now, at McDonald's, they're paying, I forgot, let's say $50, I don't know what it is, to people just
Hmm.
to fill out an application. And as you said, they're giving like $1,000 sign-on bonuses, but catches, you have to stay a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
After a while, I think companies are going to start saying, you know what, the heck with this. Let's just get, let's say a Chili's, let's just get an ordering kiosk, or how you could put something on the table and you could just buy it yourself from the table. I wonder,
Hmm.
when are we going to reach that point where these businesses, where the supermarkets, where their Targets, where, other or restaurants are going to say, why do we have to deal with sign-on bonuses? People coming and going, quitting and leaving. Let's just try to use as much artificial intelligence, robotics, technology, so we don't have to deal with it. So
Well, the technology as well, just to add on to your point,
yeah,
technology doesn't take sick days and vacation days
right,
or emergency days. They are
exactly,
there for the taking.
yeah,
The exchange is going to be mighty strange, though, because
yeah,
technology also breaks down. And unless a business is ready for that part of the business, that could be a very, then will you try to hire somebody really fast until you can get the technology taken care of? I mean, there's a lot of things that I think there's a lot of back spending. There's a lot of
yeah,
backstory to this whole thing that's still unknown, but you're absolutely right.
yeah.
Is at some point technology is going to be the great supplement.
I hope it's just a supplement, not more. Because let's take Amazon for example, right? One of the biggest knocks, people love using Amazon. I think we
Hmm.
agree. Most people love it. It's amazing how you could. Right now, if you and I wanted to order something, probably later in the day, we'll get our doorbell rings and we have it. It's amazing,
Yeah.
especially people our age who like that. Mind's blown. You couldn't even comprehend that when we were younger.
Yeah.
So the biggest knock on them is how they treat their workers. So after a while, it's like, wait a minute, they love us for how we could deliver things. They love a lot, but they complain and point fingers how we treat the workers. So I could see the next move is saying, hey, whenever we can replace a worker with one of those, those little, I forgot what they call those little robots that just go, humming along the floor, putting boxes on it. So I could just imagine every way, shape, or form they could kind of swap out a human being for some technology or robotics. They're going to do it. And
Yeah.
that's going to really be
Well,
hurtful.
it'll be interesting because when people are, there's got to be humans who cook the foods exactly
Yeah.
the way that people want it. So when people have a complaint or need that food taken
Yeah.
back, a human has to do one part of that job, either listen to the complaint or both listen to the complaint and take that food back to either give the person a refund or to cook something else that they may want. Chili's already uses like a kiosk already to go up in where
Yeah.
you can pay that way, but you can also order that way too if you really want, and I can see how easy that could be.
Yeah.
But when it comes to having problem, if you don't have a really good product to depend on, then it could just expose your business to something worse. Is that not only terrible when you're serving food and you're rotten in using AI, and
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
people will abandon a whole lot quicker than they ever had before. Before they got a little sentimentality because the person was nice when they served.
Yeah.
They heard your complaint. They felt
Yeah.
they gave you empathy, which machines can't do and can't transact
Yeah.
in that kind of way. So, but then it's going to be cut dry if it's not a smooth process all the way through from beginning to end. You just get one shot with the automation. So, and people will be willing to walk away.
Absolutely. And I can see that because, like, how many times do you have to use it like a chat box on some website, and it's just so irritating. It's like,
Yeah,
can I just talk to a
absolutely.
live human being, please? Please let me speak
Yeah.
to someone who I could just ask the questions and not get these like weird answers.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and
Yeah.
I think as we begin to see some of that come to fruition even now, that people are thinking that that they'll have choices, and you may not have that many
Yeah.
choices, and you may not have that many choices in industries as you're used to if you've been in the food service industry for many years, and it drastically changes like that. If you haven't figured out how you're going to zig when everybody else zagging, then you'll probably end up changing industries.
Yeah.
So yeah. So how exaggerated is the Great Resignation?
Mm.
To a great degree, I think it is
Yeah.
exaggerated greatly, because there's a lot of things that we just don't know.
Yeah.
Right now, we love to take this job and shove it, kind of thing. We've always loved that. We've been uh, loving it since that movie
Yeah.
9 to 5, because it was
Yeah.
empowering. We love anything that's empowering, but there's also have been days of reckoning, and we could see a little bit of both coming up here the next few months. So let's talk about and yeah, we talked about a little bit about the reality of the decision that people are making a decision to to trade offers or to consider different offers, but really, how much will we really see? You said in your article, given a little room to think about the reality of the decision, they'll quickly realize it's not such a smart decision to depart without another job. We've talked about that,
Yeah.
since the reality is that people have done it already. And people, being that they quit instead of they're fired, they're not going to get the unemployment benefits. What do you think is going to, what industries, or do you have any idea, or people you've been talking to, what industries are kind of like ready to receive people?
I think the tech industry is still doing really well. When I say tech
Hmm.
industry, like if you're an Apple, an Amazon, a Microsoft, a Salesforce, Spotify, it seems they have almost insatiable demands because they're growing like
Hmm.
wildfire. Um, Now, it depends. In other areas, it's okay. Like if you're talking to, I would say there's needs kind of across the board. Definitely the
Hmm.
ones that bounce back the most, it seems, are the ones that were hit the worst. The hospitality industry, the travel
Hmm.
industry, um, restaurants, bars, gyms, hotels, concerts, sporting events, like, those areas that were just demolished during the
Hmm.
pandemic, those where you see, the huge increases. And
Hmm.
I think with other sectors, it could be Wall Street, it could be you name it. There's needs, but not to the same level as the ones that were just pummeled, because
Yeah.
they're starting like from ground zero almost. You know what I mean? Because these think about it. Who what 6 months ago, 9 months ago, you weren't traveling, you weren't going on an airplane, you weren't going out to eat that much, you weren't going out to hotels and so on. You weren't going out to different sporting events, or if people went out, just not that many. So they
Right.
had so much room to grow. The others, not so much.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, all in all, I think that is a time when people realize that they're not going to find the job that they hope that they find. Um, I'm not to say that people not assuming that everybody gave some thought that when I get the first opportunity, I'm quitting. That they've thought about at least where to go, but I'm afraid that from the things that I hear, that the people who really successfully made the transition before everybody started quitting.
Mhm, mhm.
So, I had a couple of people in the group that I worked with last summer. It took them a while, but they were able to exit their jobs pretty successfully and found new work. And a big part of it is it takes a lot of work to get the right work, uh,
Yeah,
and a lot of times people aren't willing to do the right work to get the right work. They think that because you could just apply to the job, and because you're available, and that you are a fit to some degree, and that you're really passionate about the industry or the job, means it's going to be good enough, because there's all these openings, which really employers are not going to just hire any old body still. And that's the thing that we also have to kind of grasp and put in the midst. They're still going to be, they're more judicious just by examples of how many interviews that people have, having 10 11 interviews, that they're being is just as careful now because they know that time is an investment. It costs them tens of thousands of dollars to onboard somebody successfully and to get them up and running in such a way that they can function by themselves. That takes that company's money. Less of people or less companies are willing to take that risk to spend that money and then let somebody go after a few weeks of them being unsuccessful to their standards. But all in that, I think that people have to still, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, the strategy is critical. At this particular point, more than ever, you're competing against more people than you ever had before, perhaps in some of those industries. But you
Well,
have to
that's a
consider, what's going to be right for you.
you know what? That's so interesting you brought up because that remember I mentioned about how that guy Mike Conley and all the people who were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a bunch of people are bringing up too, which I really didn't think of that much. Is that they were saying they feel that because a lot of these companies now open it up to remote work. So let's say you live where you are in Chicago. Okay, most people in the past, pre-pandemic, would look
Mm-hmm.
at jobs that you could commute to Chicago. But
Mm-hmm.
now that same job based in Chicago, you could get someone from Texas, from Wyoming, from Florida, from New York,
Mm-hmm.
from Canada. So now you're competing with so many people. And what a lot of folks were saying is that they wonder the interview process is elongated because it's FOMO, fear of missing out. They're thinking, wait, with so many people from all over the country that are going to apply, why do we have to rush this through? If we drag
Mm-hmm.
our feet and slow walk it, maybe we're going to find that purple unicorn and we're not going to have to pay that person so much because they're living in a lower cost city. So, yeah, so you're right. So I think these changes make it a little harder to find a
Mm-hmm.
job and it takes longer. Whereas,
Yeah.
so on one hand, yeah, you might say there are more jobs, but then you don't get that undercurrent. Yeah, there are more jobs, but now there's going to be more competition and it's going to take way longer.
Yeah, when the economy shifts like it, we have enough data, just even through the eye test, if not if through surveys that have been done. When the economy shifts, so does the employer, so does the
Mm-hmm.
industry, and they all seem to do the same thing. They put filters in within the interview process so they can screen closer and make sure that they get the right fit instead of just
Yeah.
trying people. It used to be a time when people will give you a try. That was a cliche, and for some people it worked, some people it doesn't.
Yeah.
People aren't going, companies aren't going to give you a try. They want to know that you're running the first day, even if you're just training, that you're catching on, that you're plugged in, and that you're that they can see the success oozing from your blood that very first day and that first week and those first 90 days, whatever it is. And they will also be unsentimental letting you go if you don't fit. For whatever reason, no matter what the stage, it might be a last part of the your hiring to where you're not getting a certain part of it when you should, or if they feel you should, and they're willing to cut their losses at that particular point. So you got to think like, you got to think critically and think like the employer. What are how I'm going to zig when they zag, or how are you going to zag with them when they do so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I just saw Julianne had a couple of questions or statements,
Mhm.
and this is going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it. I think
Mhm.
in terms of why there's so many interviews, in addition to what I mentioned before, I think a lot of hiring managers are scared to make a decision. And they feel if I make the wrong decision and I hire Jack and he turns out to be a complete loser, politically at the office, I'm going to look bad and they're going to question my judgment.
Mhm.
So I think what a lot of people do is this they don't say, because you don't want to admit it. So they're not going to say, hey, I'm scared to make a decision. I'm indecisive. They're not going to say that. They're going to come up with other excuses. They're going to say, well,
Mhm.
I think it makes sense for you to meet Mark because you're going to probably interact with Mark when you do such and such.
Mhm.
And Well, now you should probably see Jane too, and then you just keep going on because you're afraid to make that call. And it's not easy to make that call. It's tough. It's tough to say yes and then go to your boss and explain why you want to hire Mark or why you want to hire Julianne. And you have to really be confident in it. But it's much easier to then say, well, we have 12 people who interviewed them and they all want to hire Julianne. Now you feel like you're safe because it's a decision by consensus. So now all the risk is off you because if something goes wrong, you could say, well, it wasn't me. They all wanted to hire her. So I figured, hey, if they all wanted to hire her, who am I to stop it? So it's a weaselly kind of way of doing things, but it's understandable because human nature is the way it is. It's not easy to make a decision. It's not easy. It's not easy to buy a home, to buy, rent an apartment, to lease or buy a car. They're big decisions, and it's easy to put those decisions off. And same thing, I think, what happens with hiring, that companies don't train people to interview, and they think for some reason, I've found this all these years. It's so weird to me, is that companies just feel, hey, Jack, Mark, you go and interview someone, and like, okay, all of a sudden we're going to interview. That's not easy to do. It's really hard to do. So that you throw somebody to the wolves to interview, they don't know what they're doing. They're scared to make a decision. And then it makes all the sense in the world why things are it just doesn't work out right, because you're not having the system in place to make it work. Now, it'd be different if, imagine they said for every person who's a manager and you're going to hire somebody, you're going to go through a boot camp of training, what to ask, how to make a decision, so on and so forth, so that they'll be empowered to go out there. And when they interview people, they're going to be more confident in their decision-making ability. And then I would imagine too, companies should do this too. Think about it, Mark. They should have some metric in place. Let's say after 4 interviews, someone has to intervene and say, okay, Mark, you had this person come back over 3 months for 3 interviews. Let's talk about it. What's going on? Why can't you make a decision? So you don't end up having 9, 10, 11 interviews. You follow? And what I notice with these companies, they don't do that. They just go, okay, Jack, Mark, go interview and figure it out. And you could see the results are making people really unhappy. How many times have someone said, oh, the whole process is broken? Because they feel frustrated. It's not working. And it's not so much that it's broken. I think that companies, for whatever reason, don't really, and I'm completely generalizing, they don't sit down and say, hey, how do we make this better? How do we figure it out? How, let's give training, let's give hand-holding, let's intercede throughout the process to make sure it's working. Let's get feedback from the candidates. Why wouldn't they go to candidates and say, hey, we'd like you to fill out this just very brief. What do you think of the experience? And then they could take that information and say, hey, this is, we're not treating these people fairly. We're being rude and inconsiderate to them. We got to change because our brand is at risk. And people are going to think of us as a bad company, and they're going to tell their family and friends it's not going to work out. Here's another thing. Why not pay candidates when they go for a job? Why not giving them
some
stipend?
Some are actually not enough, but some are paying a few dollars just to compensate them for the efforts. But of course, they've already been through 8 to 10 interviews. So getting $100, you could either consider a prize or a consolation prize, so to speak, for not getting the position.
It's an interesting concept, though, isn't it? Like,
it
could be
is.
a gift certificate or something. Something to show goodwill, because I think that would go a long way. So, I mean, could people get ticked off like, okay, I went through 5 interviews and all I got is this dumb gift card, to wherever, but at least something to show, hey, I care. You know what I mean?
But I appreciate the point about how it's companies don't train the interviewers to interview, or they don't have to streamline the process in such a way that everybody can agree when we see the right candidate, we all see these features. It seems like even though they may know experience because they've worked together for a long time. I did that when I was a manager back in the day, where I had somebody else I interviewed with, and we interviewed so many people, we can look at each other and we knew exactly what the candidate is, but not everybody's for that opportunity. So it looks strange to everybody else. How did they choose a candidate? And it's like I said, there should be a certain MO that follows a candidate. And unfortunately, people aren't trained that way. And I've got to say too, as well, that I was fortunate to get some training on interviewing and being able to ask questions, what to look for on certain signs, nonverbal communication, whatever you want to get into. There's a whole science behind it. Some companies don't feel like it's even worth it because they're spending money elsewhere. But I really believe that you're right, that, if there was a fair process that was consistent for the candidate, and the candidate can feel good, at least that they were given a fair shot, and I'm speaking in relative terms here, but I don't know if anybody ever feels like that they were given a fair shot at a job that they were turned down for. But at least feel good that at least they gave their best and all of that. But what's not often communicated is that what that perfect candidate looks like, and the only answer you often get is you'll know it when they see it.
How about this? How about this out of the box thought? Why wouldn't companies do this? Let's say you have in your HR group interview, like phenomenal interviews. They're just great at it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have that interviewer, that's their whole job. And they'll sit down, like say you're the hiring manager. We'll both sit down together. But
Mm-hmm.
as a good interviewer, the interviewer will ask the questions and all that. As the manager, you'll kind of pipe in and give your share. But then you can know it'll be a tight kind of interview. The person, that's their profession. That's what they do. That's all they do. So they kind of know how to get stuff out of somebody, how to get the best
Mm-hmm.
stuff out of it, how to find the
Right.
worst stuff. And the manager could then ask the finer points of like, as it relates to your staff and the job, you could kind of put it in there. Things like that, just
Yeah.
you throw it out there to make it
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, but I like Julian's comment. Ultimately, is a sufficient hiring process is key to making the time frame reasonable. I think
Yeah,
what we're seeing ultimately is that the timeline has become not only unreasonable,
yeah,
but it's kind of hard to figure out what's the reasoning behind
yeah,
elongating the timeline. So when people ask you how long will it take, and you say 3 months, that's a long time to figure out. Either you,
yeah,
as a candidate, you're thinking, well, is the company's not that smart, or they change the type of people that they're looking for? What particularly is it? And
yeah,
it makes them confused and frustrated, even just hearing that it's going to
yeah,
take that long, because some people are in a situation where you have been unemployed, not to your fault, for several months already. Now you got to wait 3 months to make sure that you get through the process. So it becomes really strange, and I don't know what the difference between the quality of somebody being hired in 1990 as opposed to being hired in 2021, where you have 3 times as many interviews.
that's interesting, right? To see that would be interesting if someone did a study on that, right? What
Right.
when there's like 2 or 3 interviews, how long did someone stay at the company? What were the results? And now when you do 5 to 10 to 12, I wonder if there's I'm gonna do some research on that after this, Mark. Seriously, I'm gonna
Yeah.
Google, see
Well,
if
there
like
there
there's
is
stuff
some
out there.
research. Yeah. Well, there is some
Yeah,
research on if you're referred by a company, and I forgot what company this that did the research, but if you're referred, you actually stay with the company longer than if you were cold applying via online, because that referral is a trusted person, likely that they considered that they'll be like the
yeah,
person that referred them. So so there's that study, and there are a few other studies that are looking at, but I think
yeah,
people they tend to naturally refer people who are like them.
yeah,
And if you're well liked, then that person has an edge as a person to who have
definitely.
had a successful application online. So it becomes it's an interesting game, and I
Yeah.
can only say it's a game sometimes because, again, just when you think that people are doing it one way, then there's other layers and filters and
Mhm.
obstacles. It's like jumping hurdles at times during the interview process. So Julianne says that process you just explained was the best interview I ever had, and was hired in 3 interviews within 2 weeks. Yeah, that makes sense to me. There was a day when people got hired on the spot and lasted many years.
Yeah, what a
I guess
change.
people run out of patience.
Yeah. Yeah, the referrals make a lot of sense because, you know, you have someone to vouch for you, and that's always, a good move when you're looking for a job to find people at the company and have them put a good word in for you. Or if you don't know it, find somebody who knows somebody at the company put a good word in. And then
Right.
people, this I've definitely seen studies on, that people who have like a core nucleus of friends at the office will stay way longer
Mhm.
because they feel, hey, I like working with Julianne, I like working with Mark, and even if I'm thinking of leaving, I'm like, well, they're my friends. I don't want to leave. I'm going to stay. So yeah. So if you have that, there's definitely
Yeah.
more longevity.
The only thing that might be a caveat to the referral aspect, which has been proven as well, is that people refer them like us. So let's say you have a company that's seeking to hire diverse ethnic
Mhm.
candidates, and but basically 85 to 90% are homogeneously the same type of person. They're likely to invite somebody or refer somebody who's the same, and you never solve the diversity issue. As
That's a good point.
opposed to, huh?
Yeah, that's a good
Was
point.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
well,
that's a
that
good
is.
point.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
called.
yeah.
It's called similar to me
Yeah.
bias, and it exists in tenfold. And I've seen it where people have all the good intentions and spent the money and trying to bring in different aspects because their customer base was changing. And they're in particular, I worked with one school, and trying to provide them a particular service, and they had this one school where it was multi-ethnic. It was fascinating, except this one campus where everybody looked the same. So for the school to receive funding, they had to have a certain meet certain numbers, and they were feverishly trying to overcompensate for the
Mhm.
for the campus that was homogeneously hiring folks. So what happens is that if they don't meet their numbers, they don't get that funding. So they do everything else, but that one campus stays the same. And I thought that was a very fascinating dynamic. Is that they tried to solve a problem. Everybody except for 66% of the campuses were trying to
Mhm.
solve the problem, but this one campus, which was the other 33%, got to be exactly who they want to be. And you know, I could go on about that, but all that to say is that, yeah, you've got to also change the way that your referral, and be intentional if you're going to have those kinds of numbers that you want to impress people, especially if you have a certain client base that's going to be worldwide now. Somebody from India is going to want to hear somebody that at least is somebody that might be similar to them, or somebody from Africa may want somebody similar to them, and that you're going to do business with, even if it's from the point from being in the C-suite. They want to. People feel more relatable, more comfortable if they met other people that had the same type of goals, and as far as ethnic is concerned, to have that same similar type of relationship with somebody like themselves, and they'll be more successful. It's been proven. So it's complicated at times, but yeah, the referral thing does work, depending upon what your goals are ultimately.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. It reminded me. I did this search for this company down south,
Mm-hmm.
and they, and they said to me, "Gee, Jack, we really blew up. We're global. We're all over." And what happens is we have these meetings, and they're a bunch of Southern white guys, a bunch of good old boys,
Mm-hmm.
and we realize it's not a good look. And also we need just diversity of thoughts, opinions, and all that. So, and this does happen quite often. So they'll say, hey, can you find somebody who, could kind of be a little different than us. So has some different ideas, some thoughts, some, various life experiences to join us. So I'm seeing more and more of that where
Yeah.
they kind of get it and they realize, and for them also, they're saying it's good for business because then you could relate more with the people. So let's say they were a private equity shop in a very kind
Mhm.
of certain niche kind of thing. And they're meeting with all these people who, when you meet with them, they have a whole diverse kind of group of folks. So
Mhm.
they say, hey, we want someone because then it doesn't, it's better because like then there's odds are we'll bond, we'll have different ideas, different thoughts, what have you. And yeah, I've been getting, over the years, definitely you could just see if you would chart it, how much more of those kind, requests that, you get, hey, can you kind of, you got to help us out with this. Oh no.
Yeah, I
Oh,
muted myself. Sorry.
okay. Yeah.
No, it's changing all over, and you know, I think those who are going to make the success a switch successful are kind of anticipating the change rather than changing when there's a demand for it. Because when there's demand for it and you're not able to meet it, then too late. So we're coming to the
Yeah.
top of the hour. You've been everywhere, so it's almost moot to ask you where are you, or what should people follow next in you talking about other than your articles on Forbes. What should people should
Yeah.
follow that as
Yeah.
well?
I'm starting to do this new kind of thing for LinkedIn Live where
Mm-hmm.
talking about the future of work. And there, I'm going to try to do it. I've done a few just testing it out, but I'm going to try to shoot for like maybe at least 4 days a week at 2 o'clock.
Mm.
And if you want to join me with one, usually for now it's just me because I'm testing out to see,
Uh-huh.
just get comfortable with it. But the whole idea behind it, I just want to talk about a lot of things we talk about here is like
Mm-hmm.
where things are going. Where's the puck going? We want to go to where the puck's going, not where it's been. So what industries are going to do well, what industries won't do well, what jobs are going to be growing, so that for
Mm-hmm.
people could start, and this is exactly what you were talking about earlier, kind of have their mindset. So, okay, here's where things are going to go. I want to go in that direction. Here's what's happening. Here's what's going to work, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. But then also talk about all these different trends that maybe the 4-day work week, flexible schedules, the hybrid work week, you know, open up so people could see, hey, there are different choices that they could do. And they can go to their job and their boss and say, hey, I didn't know this was even a possibility. Can I be a digital nomad? So that's
We'll be
something
talking a
I'm
little
working
bit
on.
about that. Yeah, we'll be
Yeah.
talking about a little bit about that on Friday
Yeah.
with Damien
Mhm.
and Esther, who's going to join us on
Mhm.
Friday. The Modern Job Search Checklist for those who want to check it
Cool.
out. But we're going to talk about that because I think that's pretty important to look at, because that's also one of those things that were, people. It sounds desirable, but it's not going to be easy just to jump into a job where there's a 4-day work week.
Mhm.
I think there's some caveats that are going to be involved. We don't know if people are going to be available 10 hours a day for 4 days, or whether people will be able to work when they want to. Um, it could be spliced
Yeah.
up in many different ways, and that's something people should try to find out before they go jumping into this new trend. But yeah, so great. Yes, I'd like to join you on one of those days. We'll have
Yeah.
to talk about that.
Excellent.
Uh, so cool. So definitely follow your articles on Forbes. Follow me at thevoiceofjobseekers.com. I've got a couple of things coming up, and I'll talk more about it as we get to the closer to the date.
Yeah. A little tease. I
Uh,
like that. Leaving
yeah,
us
yes, a little
wanting.
tease. Actually, one of them I can say that it's going to be a Twitter chat, and I think I mentioned it last week with McGraw Hill, which
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
giant publisher. So
Cool.
they invited me to be featured on their timeline. So that'll be a lot
Awesome.
of fun. So yep, got a couple other things that are coming up as well. So stay tuned in the
Excellent.
meantime. thank you, Jack, for
Thanks.
being a
It's good
part of
seeing
this as
you.
always. Good to see you.
Excellent.
And we got a busy week, busy 5 weeks. We got people like Kenneth L. Johnson that will join us next week. We got Ebony Jackson that will join us the following week, and I think it's Orlando Haynes. We have Kyle Elliott, who's going to be joining
Is that
us. Kyle Elliott will be on the
caffeine?
fourth.
Is that caffeine,
The
Kyle? Or
caffeinated Kyle, yes, it
okay,
is.
okay,
He's going to be a lot of fun. I just saw
yeah,
him on a show. He was
yeah,
fantastic. And then Mike Bird from the Career Builders podcast, I
yeah.
think he's also going to join us on August 11th.
And
So
I
we
think we
got a
also have to
bunch
have
more coming.
Julianne join us. She seems like
Yeah,
really eager
well,
to get involved. So
Julianne, Julianne, you might have a little invitation coming to you for August. And also, we got some other folks that we've been talking to that they want to wait
Mhm.
for the right time.
Okay,
So that time is going to be approaching here soon. And that's going to be a blast. And we'll talk more about that later in weeks as we get closer to that date. In the meantime, thank you very much for
excellent.
joining us on Job Seeker Nation. Continue to join us, follow us, look for our writings, look for our interviews, because we're talking more about the future of work and the Great Resignation, the Big Shift, the Great Reshuffle, and all that kind of stuff. See you later. Have a great week.
Take care. Thanks. Bye bye.